All right, guys, we're back. This week we're going to get into another semi-deep dive, but a rabbit hole that we're kind of just cracking open.
Right. And I think, so speaking about that, like, I think we're finding our voice on the podcast and even within StrongFit, I would say. And mental health is really, that I told Richard that 5 years ago?
Yeah.
When he said, like, where you want to take StrongFit, it was always mental health. But, what can you do? But so there's going to be a specialization really toward mental health, I think, and still performance. The key with this is exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to explain to everybody. You don't get to be good at anything with the wrong mindset. And I think Julien is proving that.
Well, that was the thing she even talked about, was that, like, getting a coach that only narrowed things up to shoring up the athletic version of yourself as the athlete.
And pushing it on buttons.
And pushing is only going to get you, it'll get you a little bit further until you're too deficient to progress anymore.
You'll become too crazy. Yeah.
And once you actually are developing the human and the body, that as though they are different things, because they're not, the athlete and the human, the mental health, everything all kind of just can grow and progress together, as it has to be.
I think the voice of StrongFit is that if you want to get better at ... put whatever word you want there, a coach, an athlete, whatever, you have to become a better human.
Yeah.
And I've always looked at it like that. Maybe it's my more artistic nature that comes in, or everything is an art, but I think that's our voice, it's like, you gotta be a better human. If you're stressed out of your mind, you're not gonna perform.
And better,
not over time.
And becoming a better human through the approach, through a real craftsman's approach, I think is the key. Like, through the better for human approach, through the pursuit of mastery, I think is just really important.
But by the way, speaking of that, like, because we deal with people that are depressed and everything, I gotta tell you, you're not a good human just because you don't do shitty stuff. Mm-hmm. Being a good person, and human, I mean person, not raping women or not, killing people does not make you a good person. A good person requires a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's something where you wake up in the morning and you work on and everything. I think people have very low values for when it comes to being a good person. I blame Facebook for that, where everybody's, with those fucking quotes and everything. Yeah. Being a good person requires a lot of work and a mastery of being human, of working on values. Yeah. And we all have different values. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but you have to work on your values. And mine has always been toward craftsmanship and stuff like that, but it's fucking work. Yeah. If you think it's not work studying, well, I'm at 4 or 5 hours a day now reading the stuff and everything, fuck.
Well, yeah, like Julien sent me a thing this morning that was just this light 25-page fucking read that I'm getting, but I'm still getting into it, and it's like, I'm going in and I'm like, fuck. Like, I can't look at this in 40 minutes and be fucking, like, that's just not the way it is. You have to give it the time. There was an interesting thing I was reading the other day, because, that's a long story, but, like, the Les Claypool's the bass player from Primus, and he's basically widely renowned. If you remember way back in the day, VH1 had the Behind the Music series on Metallica.
Yep.
And they were talking, when the bass player died, they started auditioning for bass players. And one of the guys that came in and auditioned was this Les Claypool. And I think that was before his Primus age. But he is such a freaky virtuoso with two-hand tapping and weird circus music shit so far out there that even Metallica said, dude, you're way too good. You go somewhere else. Like, we don't have anything for you. I don't know what that is. But he has a level of mastery of that thing to where he is essentially inventing and manipulating his own instruments and stuff now. Things that you just doesn't even seem possible in the instrument. But he was talking about how his father had told him, even though he was very into music, he said, you need to learn a trade. You need to find a way to master a trade. And so the reason he was able to apply all that work and development into playing the bass
it's because he learned something else.
Is because he went into carpentry and then plumbing and then and a lot of those, and I think it was 4 or 5 different things where he had learned these hands-on trade where you have to learn, skill, and you have to learn discipline, and all of those things are a requirement. And then there's the actual process.
And those are not blue-collar values, by the way, because you find that in almost all levels. Japan, obviously, but even the samurai had the same aspect when it came to that. I think it's a fundamental. I think there's a hidden truth in that, where we put it as a cultural thing, and I don't think it is.
No,
I think it's an innate it will be explained as part of the Freestonian universe sooner or later.
There was something said too about even things like, if you look at, granted, I think it was a little easier back then, but even if you look at your like historical figures, many of them were masters at many other things, fucking exploration, or like, you know, even attorneys or medical doctors, or there's just like the amount of people that were blacksmiths by trade, you know what I mean, is that you wouldn't even know. And almost everybody back in that era needed to have some sort of trade, some sort of skill. It was just part of coming up. But that was a bit of a deflection. But what I want to what we want to get into today is something we're building forward because on the human thing.
Because I want to explain why we go toward that. And because sometimes on the YouTube comments, we see a lot of people say, okay, but what about running? Which I understand, but it is part of running. Like we cannot forget the human being ever. Mm-hmm. Like if we talk performance, there's still a human being, which I feel we are starting to dehumanize sport a little bit. We take the Kenyans running, you know, like the fucking marathon under 2 hours, and we go, oh, let me train like him. Well, first of all, you're not him. Let's start with that. It's like we were talking about that before the podcast with Janine, like in the last 3 weeks, he's packing muscle on. This is a 60-kilo woman who runs. She's a sprinter. The only upper body work we do is the rope pulls and the press, and then some
overhead stuff.
Some overhead stuff. But she has done no assistance work toward her upper body, and she's starting to pack on muscle and everything. You go, how? Well, gifted people. That's how.
Well, that is the thing. When you see the kind of dehumanization of sports at the elite level, I think it is that. Because you almost have to, because I think what happens there is you have a lot of money and incentives that appeal to the genetic best of the best are already there at that level. And even then, a very high percentage of those going to get washed out in the mix. So even people who are on the bubble at the, on the top are far more gifted than you could ever fucking imagine. And a little bit of training change and stimulus can just wind up progress for them. I remember, there was a guy called Brian Scalabrine. He played basketball in the NBA. He was basically the last guy on the bench for every team he played for forever. It was a running joke. He'd get at the end of the game. They called him the White Mamba. He was a redhead, ginger guy, just super pale skin. And he'd come out there and he'd just fire up shots, fucking miss. I mean, it was a running joke the whole, his whole career. Had 10 years, won a championship, didn't play a minute, you know, and
it was a practice squad.
But then, afterwards, there was a thing where they had a bunch of like former Division I athletes and shit like that came up who would always talk shit like, shit, I could probably beat him. What is he doing on an NBA team? And what they forget is Brian Scalabrine, almost 6'10". Brian Scalabrine has played basketball at an elite level since he was 13. If he can get a shot up on you, it's going in. He also is playing against people far more athletically gifted than he is, which means anything that he's doing against an average person, he can just body you up with no finesse. He was beating motherfuckers. They set up this whole gauntlet. He was beating people like 11-1, 11-0, 11-3. He played a group of 3 people at the same time and beat them like 11-4. Ever look up the Brian Scalabrine challenge on YouTube? It's like this is a guy who is a joke in the NBA, and he's mopping the floor with Division I, like kind of semi-pro bubble athletes who are young. That is a thing that people just don't get. That's what you're dealing with. You want to be the worst guy in the league? You're gonna have to be better than that.
Right. But the training that he's doing at his level is not something necessarily that people should study and break down to their common people.
Certainly
so we
not.
try to talk about that a lot, because people have that, which is normal. You look toward the best to see what they do. The problem is what they do is not what you need to do. It just doesn't work like that, man.
Dan Bell did his first equipped fucking meet this last weekend. Throws on just briefs, not even a whole squat suit. Just briefs and squats 502 kilos. And literally it's faster than, I really think that was faster than I could move 200 kilos.
Well, it's faster than I was squatting 500 pounds. That's for sure.
So that's, but that level of adaptation is you're dealing with a different human.
Right.
And that's the thing you always have to look at, is assess what you're working with.
Right. So that's because the key is we talk about specialization, over specialization, but this at some point, if you want to be a great coach, like you got to see the human first. Right. And in that aspect, I thought that before I learned all that I learned, and to me, it is still an undeniable truth is that if the mind falls, so does the body.
Yeah.
So what bothers us is we see a lot of coaching done where it could be at the expense of the mind, and the coach is like, "Oh, it's not my job," or "I don't care," or "It's about this year," or stuff like that, which that former coach of Julien was doing on her, by the way.
Yeah.
Like where he was just driving her through a wall. Like she would have broken. Mm-hmm. She would have gotten broken by the dude. So that's why we study what we study a lot. And so the paper I sent you was about noradrenaline, and it was fairly fascinating. Now, the paper itself is fascinating, but it's the most interesting part is what it says if you can join stuff to it.
Yeah.
A little bit of my issue right now with all the stuff biology that I put out there, it's hyper specialized. Like all hyper specialization, you lose patterns because there's just not enough of this. But if we start to add up all the stuff that we talked about to this paper, it becomes very, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And it opens the door to something I've been going at for months now without necessarily saying it, is that there's an underlying patterns that I can feel is there. I can't just pinpoint it quite yet, but I am stuck with the definition of the nervous system, the peripheral nervous system as it is with fight, flight, and freeze. And there's something that is not precise enough. It's right, but it's not precise enough. There's an underlying thing to that, but I am stuck with the definition of the nervous system, the way it is defined through biology from the last 100 years, and I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I am stuck. Like I don't have the tools to go further. So that means I'm going to have to create the tools to go a little bit further.
But it's not that it's purely conceptual. It's that there's not necessarily words or terms describing what the intent is throughout the process.
Maxwell demon.
Yeah.
There's a Maxwell demon there.
Yeah.
I know where it is. I just can't quite define it, but I'm lacking the tools I need toward the nervous system now. Fight and flight, all that shit it's a blunt instrument.
Yeah.
I need a scalpel now.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of the stuff going forward is going to be mostly my stuff, I think.
Yeah.
It's still going to be great papers, and so one of them was today.
Yeah.
So you explain or I explain?
You explain.
Okay.
Jesus.
Right. So, well, yeah, but it was about.
I come here. Julien's got some like a beautiful mind, fucking like writing all over. He has this beautiful window in the back that looks at the thing, and you'll probably will have seen it on Instagram by now. But it's just covered in graffiti now. But that you explain this.
Yeah. So I've been going at adrenaline and noradrenaline for a while.
Yeah.
Right. Because there is a vast difference between the two. Like everybody else, I thought it was kind of the same thing. Oh, fuck no, it is not. Yeah. And so, by the way, noradrenaline, adrenaline and epinephrine is the same thing. Just one is English, the other one is American. Yeah. But it's the same thing. So you have epinephrine, adrenaline, and norepinephrine, noradrenaline. Same thing. And so the biggest difference is noradrenaline is mostly produced in the brain, and adrenaline is mostly produced in the adrenaline glands, what we, medulla, whatever, adrenaline glands, right? The noradrenaline is actually mostly a neurotransmitter. It's a hormone as well, but it acts as a neurotransmitter first, whereas adrenaline is mostly a hormone.
Okay.
Noradrenaline seems to be a scalpel and adrenaline more a hammer, in the sense of once it's produced, it goes everywhere and triggers certain things. The reason I started to go in that direction is because there was something between adrenaline and insulin, noradrenaline and insulin. There were differences between those things where, like, how it affected certain state, hormones, catabolic versus anabolic. I mean, the stuff, there was a few things was like, something's weird. And so looking further and further into adrenaline, I realized that actually adrenaline is not the sympathetic nervous system. It sometimes can trigger the sympathetic nervous system, but not through adrenaline itself. So there's a dissociation between adrenaline and the sympathetic nervous system. They don't go together.
Yeah, they're not completely hand in hand.
No, they're not, and barely hand in hand, actually. They do not go hand in hand. I think it's adrenaline, and then through different processes, then the sympathetic comes, but they're actually not, it's dissociated from the sympathetic is dissociated from adrenaline.
Okay.
I was like, well, that's kind of wild. So adrenaline is mostly a hormone. So it seems to be a hormone that is there to keep certain very important body processes going while the sympathetic is out.
And so is it really an inverse relationship, or is it that it operates just on that adrenaline simply is more a general thing? And then lots of other things can happen underneath that aren't necessarily caused or related.
Right. And that's part of that underlying principle that I'm starting to see the shapes of, is there seem to be things that happen where all the process is toward the inside of the body or outside of the body, where we all think it's the body does what it does, and then there's almost like, and then he interacts with the world.
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing, where he starts inside and interacts with the world. Nah, it's because of the free energy principle, because of all that stuff. There's really two states. Even Friston talks about there's how my internal state affects the outside world and how the outside world affects the inside world, right? And there's two different worlds.
And we talked about that with energy expenditure too, is that you're always kind of in this mode where you're either choosing to spend energy on the outside world or
on the inside world.
And I think, and we talked yesterday, that does tie in very interestingly with how we view torque, internal and external torque, is that internal torque generally is the pulling of things into the body. Same thing in all of that. And external torque is very much away. And while that's, of course, just movement pattern and muscle engagement based, the cascade from where it ties into the nervous system and all of that is really tough to dispute.
There's an underlying truth to that. Yes. I know if I remember Carl Friston saying also, for example, that the reason that the certain part of the brain are so distant, like from here to here, because it mimics what you see in the world, like, the synapses between the brains, the neurons, you see a long ligament and then it does this, which is the same thing as the world where you're away from it. So he had an entire part there that is fascinating, like our inside world mimics the outside world and maybe the opposite way as well. Like there's an entire connection there that is very interesting. So I do believe that internal versus external, there's an underlying truth to that. And I certainly see that in the way the body response, right? So adrenaline seems to be in that case more internal torque.
Yeah.
And so external torque, then I start to go at noradrenaline. And then so what the paper that we're going to put on it's going to be on the StrongFit library. We will give you the title because I forgot what it is.
I got it right.
You got it? Yeah.
Yeah. Keep going. I'll real quick.
It was all about noradrenaline and its effects. And so noradrenaline is not something very studied as much as you would think.
No, and it's really interesting on this study is called Psychiatric Symptoms of Noradrenergic Dysfunction.
Yeah, whatever.
A Pathophysiological View.
Yeah, exactly. So what they're going to do is they're going to put schizophrenia, depression, anxiety through the ringer, through the lens of noradrenaline. Yeah. Because it's not, even though antidepressants, right, there's a lot of them based on noradrenaline, they were like, all right, what's the deal with that? And so they started with schizophrenia. And so I'll go over each and then I'll explain the patterns at the end. So they start with schizophrenia and they show that schizophrenia, you have two states. You have the acute state, when they're hearing the voices, and then what they call a defect state, where suddenly everything is mild and nothing happens. What they saw in the very acute state is they saw basically a high baseline of sympathetic activity. Let me take 2 steps back because I forgot to say that. Noradrenaline is the main neurotransmitter for the sympathetic nervous system. So remember melanocortin axis? That's noradrenaline. So noradrenaline sometimes acts as a hormone. Most of the time is a neurotransmitter. So it's very important.
Yeah.
So it's the neurotransmitter for the sympathetic nervous system, the stuff that makes it go. So what they saw with schizophrenia in the acute phase is a very high state of noradrenaline. They call that hyper-NAergic, so hyper-noradrenalinergic state, right, where the noradrenaline is pumping. And that's the acute state. On the defect state, they see a very, very low level of that. Right. When you look at positive symptoms of schizophrenia, so it's more toward the schizoid behavior. Positive symptoms would be to be able to max your inside world and your outside world. Like the schizophrenic people have illusions and stuff like that. So a positive symptom would be when you can match the two. Basically, like you make the world be what you want.
Okay.
And then so an artist could do that. Like this, what I mean? Like, there are different ways to see. Anyway, they call that positive symptoms. That's when you see also a very high noradrenaline state. And the negative symptoms, and when this falls down.
Okay.
Right. What I thought was interesting is how did they measure that? So that will, because that relates to stuff we do here. Skin conductance is actually a very important part of all this, because it turns out that noradrenaline has an effect on the skin. Why? Because it's a neurotransmitter from the sympathetic nervous system. And he was showing that, as I was saying, most of the weight ends up in the skin. So that means that skin conductance, the capacity of skin to react to stimulus, is a measure of the sympathetic nervous system. What's very interesting is that skin conductance response is actually proportional to the activity of the sweat glands. That means the more you sweat, the greater the
conductance is.
The skin conductance, which goes back to the neoprene.
Yeah.
Right, which was always there in order to increase the sympathetic response, so therefore the noradrenaline response. And also, so the more you sweat, like at the end with the neoprene, you start sweating excessively.
Yeah.
That's the phase when you're starting to crash.
Yeah.
That's when you're starting to drip and everything, because then your skin conductance is super high. That means that's the moment where the muscle can probably fire the best, and that's what you're gonna crash. That's why you're gonna crash.
Yeah.
And so now I can explain also why. So you know why you crashed so hard after the neoprene? Now I know why, because basically they explain it. Is all the adrenaline basically went into the skin.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing left.
There's nothing left kind of in circulation.
Yeah, so
the lights just are
the lights are off.
Yeah.
Exactly. So at that moment when you start straining like crazy, the skin conductance is at its max. You're pumping noradrenaline through the muscle, the max, which is probably where you get the greatest results.
Yeah.
And now you're wiped out.
Yeah.
And that's why for a day you're completely gone.
Be right on the opposite side of that.
And now you're in
which is why we have such a pendulum swing with the neoprenes, because it is more extreme, more intense, more output.
Exactly.
But then
more noradrenaline, but therefore
then a storm is coming. Yeah.
Exactly. But now there's something to be said about that, where therefore you're training your body to produce more, to be able to, to come back faster from it. So literally the neoprene is everything we thought it was, plus. Because I did it to increase the sympathetic reaction, which obviously I didn't know about the skin conductance thing, but there you go.
Crazy.
If you have the right principles, it always works. Anyway, and so they're testing that through also, as you'll see, like encephalograms, electric encephalograms and everything. So there's a number of stuff between the two. But so that was for schizophrenia, long story short. Then they go into anxiety and depression. Which one we go first?
Let's go anxiety.
Anxiety. Okay. So anxiety, they were splitting it in PTSD, general anxiety, panic attacks. So let me go general anxiety and panic attacks. What they were showing is that people with general anxiety, right, have a elevated noradrenaline plasma level. So basically, I have to stop saying that word, but their skin conductance response was high. What is called the spontaneous fluctuation of the skin was high. So they had a elevated state of sympathetic. The elevated sympathetic state, which we said from the beginning, what the general anxiety is. The biggest difference between general anxiety and people who have panic attacks is that people with general anxiety had an elevated state at baseline, a baseline elevated state of sympathetic, but responded normally to stress.
Okay.
Nothing crazier than others. It's like the stress coming, they had a normal response. People that are prone to panic attacks have an elevated baseline, but then have an elevated response to stress. They have a dysregulated response to stress on an elevated baseline. Similar
to what we've talked about then with the stress intolerance.
Right,
basically.
Exactly.
I mean, it's really the same.
It's that. So the question becomes, if you have a baseline that is lower, but you have an elevated response to stress, you're probably not having panic attacks, but you probably have a problem with distress tolerance.
Yeah.
So the whole key is baseline versus reaction to stress. Those are two different things.
Yeah.
So there's the underlying principle that we see even in schizophrenia.
There's a switch, a selector in there.
But based on the baseline. So that means that if you have this baseline plus this reaction, you get that. If you have that baseline plus this reaction, you get this. Yeah. And I think we're going to be able to find that most mental health issues are baseline versus reaction. And it's all a sympathetic thing.
Now, the reaction to me seems like that is where as we talk about the role of like a Maxwell's demon with the purpose of intent, seems to be in the reaction to. But the
versus a baseline.
Is the baseline, however, is the baseline some habituation, some patterning up to that point?
Right. So that's
like your whole being and life and everything, nutrition, movement is going to dictate your baseline?
Or is it a prediction?
that's also very possible.
Right. So this is where I'm working so hard for months now. This is where I'm running into.
It's really hard to separate the two too. From like your whole experience, your chemistry.
No, but that's but then it's still a prediction.
And then that is what dictates the prediction.
Right.
So I don't know that there is a separation.
But which one is observation? So it's prediction versus observation, right? Yeah. But this is where the underlying principle lies. Yeah. And the problem is that prediction, so that free energy principle, right, is not associated to biology yet. It's not associated to psychiatry yet, to all of that. So that's why I'm running out of tools. But there is an underlying principle there that I'm missing. Even with the flow, fight, freeze, there's underlying principle there that I've been thinking about for, in that sense, years. Like there's something missing. There's an underlying principle I'm missing. But it's there. It's exactly that. The baseline versus response. Everything that you saw, you saw a noradrenaline response. The question is, which way? Hyperarousal or hypoarousal? Like, going overboard or not enough. Yeah. That's where it is. And so all this is sympathetic reaction because that's a neurotransmitter of the sympathetic nervous system. But so calling it a fight and flight is woefully inadequate.
Yeah. Do you think those got to go completely, or is that something we're going to have to keep some generalities for a while?
Right. No, we have to keep them because otherwise people don't want to associate. But there's an underlying principle. There's a lens. There's a meta level to that. Yeah. That goes through a fundamental, through the Maxwell demon. There's a Maxwell demon before you get to the peripheral because there's still that fucking thing of intent.
Yeah.
That prediction versus observation, but it still runs on the intent of fighting entropy. Mm-hmm. So complexity is there. So, but then when you create complexity the wrong way, is that what depression is, where you need to reset everything because you fucked up your choices?
Well, that was the interesting thing when we were talking earlier about depression. Is that I think that the complexity issue that pulls someone back down into freeze, into that depressed state, if you will.
And even that, depending what we call depressed,
is really like
wrong choices.
Yeah, and all of a sudden it's to reduce complexity, to boil things down to something simple, and reduce the somatic error, reduce the noise.
Right. So, but it's reduce the complexity, which means you're going against life. That's why probably depression feels like death, because you're literally reducing life, except it might be necessary because the direction you were taking was the wrong one. So it would be the equivalent of a cancer. Mm-hmm. Like that's your last line of defense. But if you stay in there too long, you're going to die. Yeah. Right? So reducing complexity goes against life. But if the complexity was leading you to a worse place, to hell on earth, then maybe it's necessary. That more and more, this is how I see depression. I mean, it's the necessary reducing of complexity because you are going in the wrong direction. That would be the Maxwell demon.
I think this is a good point to remind people too, that we speak of these things and there isn't good or bad. They serve a function. And when we say depression or anxiety, it's not like, oh, fuck, that's a bad title. It really is. We're trying to describing the function that they serve within the system.
Exactly. And the nature has no reason to make one bad.
Yeah, it doesn't
There's
care.
no such thing.
It doesn't care.
No, it only has functions. Yeah. If there's something has no function, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like it's wiped out. That's the way evolution works. Yeah. And so there's an entire underlying principle there that I'm like, Right. And so we see that with anxiety, with the panic versus general, where they both have a high baseline, but one has a normal reaction, the other one has a hyper reaction. And then if you have a high baseline, but you have a hyper reaction to stress, that means then it would lower your baseline, or then you would look towards stress. So you could see there would be another issue toward that.
Yeah.
Because that reminds you of the anxiety sensitivity, where people need cardio, whereas others need stuff, because it's lactate, and we're going to get to that at the end.
Yeah.
Right. Then you go into depression. For example, depression has the different forms of depression. In the paper, they were talking about two different ones. There was one that is what they call the agitated depression, the anxious depression. And we had a lot of people saying, how do I know if I'm depressed or anxious? I feel both. What you have is what they call an agitated depression, which means your baseline is very much sympathetic, but your reaction to it drops you, puts you into freeze.
Yeah. So your reaction is going to point you down towards this deregulation, whereas on the other side,
but the baseline
on the anxiety side, it would be up towards panic.
Exactly. Right. Except your reaction to that drives you to depression.
Yeah.
I mean, but there is a baseline. And then you have what you call a retarded depression. That's their word, not mine. I'm not making fun. Where the baseline is low.
Yeah.
And then their reaction is low. And then that's the one usually, I think that's the end of the road. That's where everything is, what I found very interesting.
Stifling of...
It's complete stifling. And what was very interesting about that was in that retarded depression, the skin conductance was gone. Like the skin conductance response was gone.
Yeah. Which is almost complete dissociation.
Yeah, exactly. Complete dissociation. But it almost like your body has quit.
Yeah.
Like, so not your body, but that's where I'm still fuzzy, and I'm trying to formulate even in my own mind. It's not the body.
It's like, what is hanging on to this? We don't know what that is.
But that's the thing is, it's what that it is quitting.
Yeah.
I'm like, because literally, like spontaneous fluctuations are gone.
Yeah.
That means that it has quit. So if the skin is just a response to the nervous system, that means your nervous system has quit. Right. Which part is that? Is that the depression? Is that the prediction?
Well, and this sits at like the opposite side of what we've talked about with, for correcting somatic errors in work for anxiety and depression is things like overwhelming physical sensation, like increasing body temperature via the skin. So to correct up is to make it a
loud enough.
Loud. You feel. You really, really, really feel. Right. And the prediction and the observation, because it's intense and right there and very feeling based, is going to kind of correct itself, and it brings you back.
Exactly.
And this is so interesting because it's at the very opposite of that. It's like, no, we're just that is cut now, essentially.
Right. So
completely
it's complete dissociation
from that.
Complete dissociation from where? Yeah. And so when it's loud, we bringing you back. Okay. Bringing you back from where? Where are you going? Yeah. If your skin doesn't even react anymore, that means there's a complete dissociation. That means it's almost like if we had the soul is gone, therefore the body cannot work. Mm-hmm. Okay, what is that it? Don't give me the Jesus, God bullshit. This is the soul and everything. Yeah. We had a few comments like that. Get the fuck out of my face with this. Yeah. That's not what I'm looking for. Yeah. Where is it? That it. What is that? So that's a nervous system. But again, that's not observation because the skin is still there.
Yeah.
So, but you have disconnected completely the observation from the prediction then. Mm-hmm. And that's where the evil lies. Yeah. Is that. So obviously it's feasible, but so it's bringing in back that communication between the two. But that's the low baseline and low response. Like just dissociates everything. And I think that's the deep depression people go through. Yeah. And so the way out, again, is noradrenaline. Yeah. Right? Every time what we see is that baseline of noradrenaline and the response, which is a noradrenaline response, is the key. So I'm like, all right. So now let's go further with noradrenaline. So when you start to study noradrenaline, you realize it's mostly produced is what is called the locus coeruleus, which is a part of the brain. And what triggers a response, the production of noradrenaline is lactate. Lactate is what they call an astrolytic signaling molecule of the locus coeruleus.
And now you say signal. Does that put lactate as a cause, or is it
almost a substrate?
Is it simple?
No, it's not a substrate because that's the wrong word. Substrate is what allows you to create from. So that's not a substrate, but it's a signaling molecule, which means the lactate get to that part of the brain and it makes it trigger. Okay. So it's a trigger, if you want. It's a trigger to noradrenaline. Okay. And so, for example, lactate modulates or decides how much glycogen is kept in the astrocyte. Which is a cell in the brain, right? And the astrocyte is going to use the glycogen to produce lactate to feed the neurons. So there's an entire relationship there. Lactate is so important as a fuel for the brain. Yeah. And then it triggers directly the production of noradrenaline, which seems to be the key. The hyper or hypo is the key to all of that. So what they were pointing out in the paper is that the level of noradrenaline seems to relate to most of mental issues. It seems to be a deregulation one way or the other of noradrenaline. That means it's a deregulation one way or the other of the sympathetic nervous system. And
what I see in reading this too is you also notice that a lot of these antidepressant, antipsychotic medications are like basically affect noradrenaline. Yep. And I think that's such what a short-sighted approach, I think.
Well, yeah, because
you're just gonna add or remove
and plus, remember,
one variable from the system that you see simply a correlation and assume that the rest of the system is going to continue to operate.
But, so what by doing this, all you're doing is modifying the baseline, not the response. Anyway, you know what I mean? Because it's that low, it's a slow release and everything. So it's always a baseline step.
And assuming that you're not going to recondition all of those patterns into something equally dysfunctional or simply unscalable.
By the way, but if you look at the way all that stuff is, that means that you could take someone, I mean, I don't know, but I'm just saying, take someone from anxiety and drive them towards schizophrenia then.
Yeah.
Whatever, but you know what I mean? Like that's not true, but you know what I mean? Like I'm just, like my point is, if everything is baseline versus reaction and you change the baseline, all you're going to do is change the expression of the disease.
Yeah.
Not curing the disease. You're just going to change the expression. So imagine.
And by its nature, these conditions are progressive, meaning if you're going to move the baseline without changing and affect the expression, now it's just going to be dysfunctional and progress in a different direction.
Right. So imagine if I test for the flu, right? And I give you a product that turns the flu into acne.
Yeah.
Right. So I give you the product and I test for the flu. So your flu is gone.
Yeah.
Done. So there could be could be a very evil effect on this in the sense of my testing of the product is done on whether you have the flu or not. So I gave you acne or knee pain or whatever the fuck. But I'm like, but I done my job. You don't have the flu anymore. Yeah, but now you have acne all over your body. It's like, you don't have the flu.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's a lot of what we're saying with those pills.
Yeah.
Is like they're shifting the problem because they baseline versus reaction.
I think.
But in their sense, they go, it's effective because you don't have the problem you came to see me for.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, give me a 500-pound squat. Yeah, but then I fuck up all your other lifts.
Also without...
Did my job.
But without understanding the intent. And to take it back even to training a person is you need to understand the person, the ecosystem that you're dealing with. And without understanding the intent there it just seems so fucking risky. And because I don't know, especially with the symptoms that you're talking about, is I just can't imagine being like, oh look, well now you don't feel depressed and you don't feel anything, voices, or you don't feel anything.
Right, that'd be worse. By the way. Yeah, or now you hear voices, or now you can't feel anything, or now you know what I mean, or you were depressed, but now I give you panic attacks all the time. Well, it's better than depressed.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it is, but we can do better.
In diagnosing any system, you have to understand the function of each mechanism that you're manipulating. And to come in and say, we have correlation here and pull out a variable or manipulate one variable is not how it works. If a switch is supposed to turn something off so that it doesn't catch on fire, then I know what's happening. I cannot go in and bypass that switch because that switch is making things shut up. If I bypass that switch, everything might be fine until the initial problem continues to progress and the thing fucking catches fire. That is a fundamental way that systems work, that you cannot just go in and manipulate a variable.
Right, exactly.
Without the effects spinning.
Without the whole system crashing. Yeah. And so, by the way, when people come to see you, they don't come to see you to go like, please switch my anxiety into schizophrenia. They say, I don't want to be in pain anymore. I don't want to feel like this anymore. That doesn't mean turn it into something else. That was not the point. The point is to try to go directly at the root cause of the issue.
Yeah.
And so dysregulation of noradrenaline seems to be a key component. It's not the whole thing. So don't start making pills on that and think it's over. But it is a major component. And again, you can link it all the way back to lactate.
Yeah.
So I thought that opens up doors on a number of things. It's back to the sympathetic nervous system.
And there was another thing on there that I saw that was very cool, I thought. Because one of my favorite things when we talk about learning and prediction and everything is emotional balance. And one of the things was that the presence of noradrenaline, it shows great increase in emotional intensity.
Yep.
If you will, or what are the intensity of the emotions and awareness. And so, and so I thought that was like, what an obvious fucking function, of course, is that like for learning, when we do understand that the intensity of the emotion means you're going to learn fast, when you do have stress, a higher sympathetic response, that these things should correlate directly. And as it did. I mean, it does fit that bill quite well as
well. And to me, it rang very true, because that, for me, because that's what my life runs on. My life runs on awareness.
Yeah.
That's what I want in the morning when I study. All I want is my brain to be as aware as possible, because I want to be the smartest. I'm still going toward Charles Xavier's power. I'm still shooting for it, man. So me is, if I can increase my awareness by 0.25%, I'll shoot your kids. You know what I mean? Like, maybe not mine, but yours definitely. So when I studying that stuff, that's the first thing that comes to me is like, ooh, so if I play with noradrenaline level, I can study better in the morning. Yeah. That's what you're saying. So for me, I'm like lactate, ooh, food, ooh.
Exactly. And then,
I mean, suddenly I'm like, ooh, more neoprene, less neoprene. Like, how do I do this? Hyper versus hypo. So that's why, like, we can tie up the food, the training, all that stuff into it. That's what fascinates me with this.
Yeah, everything that we saw was like, I was like, aha, it lines up with this, or I remember this. So this was a piece that fell in quite nicely.
Quite nicely. Yeah. That one is very interesting. And again, it opens, people will like it because it's on the chemical side, so they can measure, they can see all that. But even the relationship between that and the skin makes it very interesting. So back to the neoprene.
What's noradrenaline testing like? Is that a thing that's simple as lactate testing?
Yeah.
Is it accessible or?
Oh, it has to be blood testing.
Yeah.
It's very, like adrenaline testing and everything is just blood sample.
Can we get one?
Well, I'm sure
we got the lactate one.
For noradrenaline, not a bad idea, actually. Yeah. I would like to see that when I study in the morning.
Yeah.
And if I can link that to how smart I feel, like how capable of focus.
And it would be nice to see different things from training to movement, to just try something, see what the effect is. You know what I mean? Just to see the difference, the gravity, the scope and stuff.
Beyond the question versus cyclical versus acyclical too, stuff like that. Because they were describing, like they describing passive aggressiveness in a very interesting way based on that. Yeah. That again, the baseline versus reaction, that they have actually a completely low baseline, but they have a
wild overreaction to
any stress. Yeah. But again, baseline to reaction. So low baseline overreaction is passive aggressiveness, where you don't give a shit up until something happens and then you explode.
Yeah.
So it's a depressed mode with an overreaction is passive aggressiveness. So you see that model that we could do baseline versus reaction?
Yeah.
I found
you
that.
Could almost run through some.
I think so.
Check the box.
Yeah,
if you have
I think so. Yeah. I think so. That's why I found that very interesting in that sense. Like that passive aggressiveness, I was like, ooh, I like that one.
Well, you got some windows to.
Exactly, I got more windows. Like I'm gonna fill all of them.
Got I'm gonna 3 or 4 stories here.
Definitely gonna be the movie anyway. Like my name is. Yeah.
Just for the sake of the neighborhood, okay, keep it off the front glass for now.
Yeah. Well, at least don't draw lines, because they're all gonna start wondering. If I start to see the same 3 people popping up all the time, I'll know I'm gone. I mean, like I'll just like that's it. I just crossed the line. I'm officially gone. But so there's some very interesting pattern in there. And again, back to the sympathetic and back to lactate.
Yeah.
So exercise first, man.
Yeah. Awesome.
Exercise and food.
Well, does that got us for today?
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. That way it's concise. I like it. Yeah. And you know what? It's on the StrongFit library. Go take a look. It's not as bad as the other ones to read.
No, it flows pretty well.
It's a review.
For me, it was getting the connections. Going back, it was what I did. This is how I go through and I found the thing. I was like, I like that. I just took a picture of it, kept going. I like that. You know what I mean? And took the picture.
I like it.
So I could go back, because it was those were the landmarks where I knew, at least for the sake of the podcast, where it's like, I want to elaborate on this. And then I knew that you were going to be there to fill in the gaps. But it was a much eeasier read than some of the things, only because of the lack of abbreviations. Made it real nice and slick. I didn't have to deal with like, it's the M65432-8. I'm like, motherfucker, man. Can we just name that thing? Like, that one is Kyle, the other one is Steve, and let's just fucking go with it.
What I'll do is I'll keep some of the windows and try to associate baseline to make it simple, like high baseline, low baseline, high reaction, low reaction, or like 3, high, medium, low, and then we start crossing, and then that gives you into this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and it's
because that should be simple.
It's closer to that than I think you'd think, because from looking at it, everything is actually, it's kind of just right there. So
that would make for a new. Then I have to find a cool geometrical figure to put that in, but so I don't look completely insane.
I won't help with that part.
But no, that's my artistic side. I will take care of that.
Julien can draw like perfect circles.
One time.
Yeah,
I did it one time. It was a good one. But but that's actually that's Leonardo, not Leonardo da Vinci. Who did that? he was asked to show mastery. And then he might have been, I don't think it's Da Vinci. It's someone else. I can't remember. An Italian.
I don't know.
Architect.
I only remember, I had seen a few examples of it and what the discussion was around it. I don't recall.
Oh, come on. Like, how can I forget that? See, that's the problem when you all make me fucking study biology, is I forget the cool shit. I'm way more interested in Italian architects and Greek philosophers than I am in biology. This field is really not my field. I'm doing it for you people, and I hope you appreciate the sacrifice. I do not want to remember what MIR 378 is.
Yeah.
I want Vespucci. I want, Leonardo da Vinci. I want Michelangelo. Like, those are me reading Nietzsche, not that shit.
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
maybe it'll all devolve down to that eventually.
Oh, I'm going back at some point.
Yeah.
I'm going back to philosophy because I'm not doing the biology thing for too long.
No, that sounds
I'm telling you that.
So
once I figure out cancer, I'm out.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. So thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. Support the podcast. Head on over to podcast.strongfit.com. There you could donate or join the YouTube channel. Also, go to strongfit.com. There you're going to find our online courses, education, and all of our seminar dates should be there as well. Head on over to strongfitlibrary.com to keep up to date on everything Julien's been working on. And follow StrongFit1 on Instagram and Tyler F. and Stone.